Ready, set, go. All right, so I'm starting off with this black and white slide. I just realized for the beginning of our color explorations section of this course. And what's kind of, I think, interesting here is that we're going to kind of take a couple of different approaches to it and not just be about all the feeling with it, but that plays into our next part. So take everything into account as you do this particular bit of coursework, and then the next you can apply a lot of it moving forward. So let's jump in here and advance. So there's a lot of meaning that can follow color. Culturally speaking, there are fire engines are red for a reason, and they've actually found that when there are other colors, maybe ones that are a little bit easier to see out of the corner of your eye, people are less likely to stop. Sometimes you'll see combinations of red and that iridescent kind of greenish yellow color. But colors have meaning, and they can really work to your advantage when you're creating artwork. When people think about yellow, they think about things that are happy. When they think about red, they're things about danger or stoplights or things like that. And even when we get into artwork like this Van Gogh piece, you can see it has a lot of kind of emotion to it. It feels like dark. It feels cool. It feels, like a little bit turbulent because of some of the texture, but it gives you this idea of this kind of coolness. But what we're going to talk about really next is like, how do we define color? How do we, so far in the course, what we've been doing is we've been using in the computer realm, we've been doing color as a red, green, blue, and that's red. That's because of the little pixels that are on the computer screen. If you were able to go up really close to the pixels, and I remember doing this kind of as a kid on TVs, you get really in close to those Trinitron displays or those fancy TVs, and you'd see a couple little dots in there. And those are the three different colors that you're seeing. And that's because the systems that are working for the computers are running as a light kind of system. So it's a little bit different than if you're doing pigments. Red, green, and blue are your primary colors in the world of light. If you add up all the red, all the green, all the blue, then you get white light. Whereas if you were doing with pigments, you're going to use a different set of primaries that we all learned when we were taking art class. But in art class, usually in more advanced ones, we're not talking about those other basic primaries. When we talk about color, we're talking about a hue, a value, and an intensity. Now, I have to be honest, I didn't necessarily remember all this from art class. I didn't take a lot of high school art at the time. But if we're going to talk about hue, hue is really just the color that you're thinking of. So any color of the rainbow that you're kind of picking, whether it's red, orange, yellow, Roy G. Bivet, that is the hue. Hue is your color. The value, though, if you're doing a value, that's if you were going to say do a value range, or if you were going to try to, and if you've done that in art class, say I had a colored pencil and I was trying to get an idea on how light and dark I could make it. You'd start off by coloring that one little area once, and then if you come back and color it again at the same pressure a couple more times, and you can do it make a series of boxes and do that value range so you can get an idea on how much of that pigment you're putting down on the paper. That is really your value. The intensity, though, is really how bright or dull that hue is. So that one can be better defined in pigments as how much it reflects other colors or not, whether it just reflects yellow or if it reflects other colors. Because pigments are really reflecting the light. They're not actually the light itself. Whereas in the computer world, it's a little bit different. Now, this is where it gets a little bit where I'm going to kind of stray off out of the presentation mode here and go and explore a few things. Because this hue, value, intensity is what you might learn in art class, but of course in the world of computers, they've all worked out all the ways to do it with very similar values to make it easier. Because trying to determine how much red, green, and blue are in a particular color is not very intuitive. And that's why sometimes you'll add two different colors and you'll get yellow, and you're like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. So there's a way to get those primaries. So I'm going to jump out of here for a moment And let's look at the color picker for a moment. We've looked at this a little bit in one of the other lead-ups to it. There's a link to it at the beginning of the course. And in the color picker, if we look at this down here at the bottom, you'll see that there are actually 4 different settings plus this hex value that is available. So here, our red, green, blue, this gives us an idea of how much red, green, and blue values that are in there. This one for the CYMK, this is for your printer ink. If you have a color printer, you've got the cyan, the magenta, the yellow, and the K is your black. So if you're looking for values that match that, you can do it that way. But in what we're going to be working with, we're really going to be looking at these other ones. Now, if we think about how they designed this color picker, this rainbow that we have here going across right here, this is really our hue. So this is a way for us to kind of adjust our hue back and forth. Now, if we observe this, and this is definitely worth a few minutes to play with, to maybe see if you can gain a little bit of knowledge or explore the color itself as you play with this color picker. And all you have to do to get to it, as a reminder, is type in color picker into Google. It's one of the default, it's a default tool that shows up, just like the calculator and timers. So if we move this back and forth and we observe what happens here in the HSV and HSL, which I'll define in just a second, you'll notice that as I move this back and forth, only that first value changes, and the H is the hue. So as I move it across the spectrum here, I'm starting from red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, and then when it gets all the way back to the end there, it's giving us an opportunity to kind of loop. And when it gets all the way over, then it'll be back to the 0 point. So this is a way to very easily kind of visualize the hue going back and forth. As we move this up and down, you can notice that only one of the values moves here. I'm going to push my little marker here to the side, and what I want to have happen is as I move it up and down, you'll notice that only that last value, that last value in these two are changing. That's not the case in the other one. So take a few minutes to kind of play around. If you look at the red, green, blue one, it moves 2 different numbers as it moves up and down in the spectrum in this movement. So take that into consideration when you do this. Now, I don't typically like to use Wiki for any of these kinds of things, but Wiki has a really extensive page on this hue, saturation, lightness in the case of what's used on the web or on computer displays, and the hue, saturation value as well. So it has this really extensive, long document about it, even to the point where it talks about how to do conversions for them, and it really gets very, very mathy on how they can use different equations to make them all work out. Well, what's nice with the P5 construct is if we go into P5 and we look at our reference and we just look up color, which actually I can type in color for search, but I can see it's right there at the very beginning. Color mode is what we're looking for here. We're going to look at the color mode and see what our options are. So inside of color mode in the P5 reference, it gives us the default one, which is this red, green, blue color mode. That's the default. That's how it starts off. But you can use the color mode command, it's usually up in your setup, to set up an HSB hue, saturation, brightness option. So if I scan down here very quickly, I can get down to see what the parameters are. So the constant for these are either red, green, blue, HSB, that's the hue, saturation, brightness, or the HSL. So that'll give us the same numbers that we were seeing in the color picker here. So that's really kind of a neat way to kind of look at it and understand how those pieces are working. Now, let's go back really quick here and think about, all right, if I can do that in the computer realm now, I can use those same kinds of values. Maybe now what I can do, and this is our hue, saturation, lightness, hue, saturation, value, hue, saturation, brightness. But what's interesting about these colors is even though we might pick them and find a color that really works for us, it's not the only thing that determines what that color looks like. Because what color is next to it actually has a really big impact. So if there's an adjacent color, they could easily change it. And that is where the work of Joseph Albers comes in. He's a German artist all the way back from like Bauhaus days that then became a Yale professor. And I thought, again, I'm using a wiki article here just because I thought it was kind of funny that the guy that is known so well for studying color has a black and white photo on his Wikipedia page. In fact, he wrote the book on the interaction of color, which is celebrating a 50th year anniversary a couple years ago. So we're already, what, 5 more years in or 6 more years in? So 56th anniversary of it. And this book is actually really interesting in the way he talks about or shows different colors, and there's been a few updates to it. Now, what I'm proposing is that we take an example that this is very similar to one of his other works. It's not his actual work, but it's similar to one of his works. That we take one of these examples and look at it as a way of how those colors are interacting. The two boxes here, the two brownish boxes that I'm pointing to, these two boxes are actually the same color, but when you see them on your screen, unless they've been pushed or shifted by the compression of YouTube or however the algorithm is that works this out, these two colors are the same color, but they don't look like it because of the adjacent colors next to them make our brains kind of shift one way or the other. Recently, in a Popular Science article, there was an interesting image where they were showing a picture of a skull. It was just like an outline graphic artist version of a skull behind two different grids of color. And it looks like it all should be the same, but when you look at it, they don't look the same. And so I took a moment to write up my own little code for this to try to show an example similar to it. And what I did is I made this example. So I've got this blue and yellow background that's running, and I've got a couple for loops that are building these lines going across. And then I have these kind of hot pink colored circles, ellipses, sorry. And when I click, I've made it so that it has a mouse trigger when you do it. So it says when the mouse is pressed. If I press that, it's going to follow my mouse, and I can move it. And what's going to happen here is that one of them is going to go behind the blue ones, and one of them is going to go behind the yellow ones. So as I move it up and get up to the top, you'll notice that the two colors look very different in the way they're perceived. Now, what can happen here as I do compression, and I was testing this with a couple different ways when I posted it online, is that even though when I added up, I thought there's no way that's right. It must be either the pigment that's doing it or the compression. And so I made this very clearly a way of being able to drag it up and kind of let it go. Now, we're going to use sliders. I want really to use one that'll make it so that we can use this example. But it's really a way for all of us to experiment with color. I'm not expecting a big story with this one unless you want to pick a particular color set that tells a story or a mood or feeling. But I think this is going to be a really interesting way for all of us to explore color and get a better understanding of how they're going to work. So sorry for that intro video on the long side, but it's really one of those things that you'll see it sometimes as there's optical illusions and things like that on the line, but artists play with those optics and those tricks all the time, and I think it's a really good way to get this kind of experience under your belt and be able to use them as a tool moving forward. So I look forward to seeing what we all come up with after you learn the skills to build that, and that's it for now. Bye.